In late April and early May, heavy rains in the Mississiippi River watershed pushed the river to record heights, flooding hundreds of thousands of acres and ruining the chances for a successful crop year for many farmers across Mississippi. With winter wheat not quite ready to harvest, and with corn and soybeans already in the ground, many farmers faced a disaster. Not only will they lose the crop, but they have contracts booked on crops that won't be harvested.
I think everybody was really excited with the high commodity prices. The problem is a lot of people went out and booked $10, $11 soybeans. Now they're at $13, $14, and the elevators are going to want their money if they don't deliver the crop. So, you book 20,000 bushels of soybeans at $10 and it's at 14, all of a sudden you're owing $80,000 on top of not making a crop.
As the river was rising, Miller, who farms in Sharkey County, felt helpless.
Well, right now we're all kind of waiting. We're watching the river. It's supposed to top the backwater levees at 56.2 feet and come over the backwater levee, which it was designed to do. The Corps said that it would not break at a hole. They've had levees do that before, so we're waiting to see if that's going to happen. They're talking about this area here of having 95 foot of water on it, which would put us in about 4 foot of water where we're standing today. And it will affect most every farm that's not on Deer Creek in this area.
While Miller said that some, but not all of his land will flood, the same cannot be said for Doug Jeter. Jeter farms about 500 acres of soybeans, wheat, and corn in Warren County. The river took his farm early.
All of it. Everything's underwater. Lost all my wheat, lost my beans, and there won't be anything left, I guess you could say, on the west side of 61 for anybody that's farming in this area. I called the Corps yesterday checking to see about further down the line about replanting, even if we're going to get to plant. And at this time, they still don't know. Out to June the 20th, I think they had the river like at 46.7 feet. And at that stage, I'm still all underwater at June the 20th. And that's getting beyond your planting date then. So right now, we're not sure if we're going to even be able to plant this year.
At the same time Jeter is mourning the just planted crops in his field, some farmers were trying to save crops that they'd had in the field since last fall. Emile Guedon and his family farm in Adams County near Natchez. Their red winter wheat crop was nearly ready for harvest.
What we're basically trying to do, Mr. Gregg, is cut the wheat before the water gets on it. But we're trying to give it as long as we can in the field to dry down before we cut it. So we're just cutting what the water's going to take every day. It's not completely dried down in the field. We're running about 20% moisture, and we're having to run it through a grain dryer.
So how much is it taking a day? I mean, how much are you having to harvest a day?
Around 50 or 60 acres on this one place. Now we've got 2 more combines in 2 separate places doing the same thing we are. That wheat's a little bit more wet than ours, than this place down here. We've been cutting down here since last Thursday.
Guedon says his plans for this year are still up in the air.
Well, we're going to see how long the river comes up. I mean, how long it stays up and when it starts falling back. Our fear right now is it's such a big river and it's a little later than most rivers. Most of them we get crested in April, big rivers, but we're not sure we're going to be able to plant everything behind it, in the fall. I mean, to plant it in time to cut it.
What's your cutoff date?
Well, it depends on how much we get planted before we set our cutoff date. We've planted beans. Last year I planted some beans behind the river in the middle of July. And I don't like to plant them much later than that. My grandfather and uncles, they've planted them in August before, but usually our yield drops significantly with beans planted in August.
The river crested in mid-May, but that was not the end of the problems for agriculture. The water started its slow descent, but didn't get below flood stage in most areas until mid-June. Rob Coker from Yazoo County would be what most people would consider a large-scale farmer.
Well, I've expanded this year when my neighbor retired, and I'm farming 7,500 acres this year, or trying to. Planted 4,300 acres of corn, and I had 750 acres of wheat, and was going to plant the remainder in soybeans. We stopped planting as the floodwater started coming up and started getting our center pivots, our engines, our wellheads, electric panels, and protecting equipment. Took us about a week to do that as we waited for the floodwaters. Then we sat around and said, is it coming? And it did. We've lost anywhere between 2,500 and 3,000 acres of corn. I estimate I had a total of probably 4,500 acres underwater at the peak, at the crest.
Coker is asking himself the same question as many other farmers. What do we do now?
If I have to do tillage, I may put soybeans in there, and that's going to be decisions that we go field by field, case by case. Our plans are to plant our irrigated land first. We're fearful that we're not going to be able to get it all replanted into a crop. So we're going to focus on our irrigated land where we have the higher yield potential and protection from the heat and the drought. And then we'll move into more, the dry land areas. My goal is to break even. I told my banker and tell people that my goal is to break even. If I can make a little money, I would just be overjoyed. But if I could break even, I think we would have a very successful year. And so that's our goal.
Matt Edgar farms next door to Coker in Yazoo County, but he lost 75% of his crops.
Well, right now, what we ended up getting flooded completely was about 1,650 acres. That consisted of about 650 acres of wheat, about 500 acres of corn, and the balance was in beans, somewhere between 400 and 500 acres. The wheat was in about 2 weeks of being ready to harvest. The corn, we had almost finished everything on it with the exception of a little fertilizer, and the soybeans were up and growing about a month old. We saved about 500 acres of corn and 150 acres of wheat is all we saved.
These farmers are in need of some help to keep their operations in business. Fortunately, the companies that provide their seed have stepped up to the plate.
One of them's giving 60% replant, one of them's giving 75% replant. So that's going to help us on some of the cost of the seed. And, we're hoping for a good bean crop and good prices. And if the Lord's willing and everything works well, we will be able to cash flow.
While row crop farmers have been the focus of most of the damage, other areas of agriculture were affected also. Mississippi leads the nation in farm-raised catfish production, and for a while it looked like many of the catfish ponds in the Delta were going to be flooded and the fish were going to just swim away. But that industry seemed to dodge the bullet.
We only had a small number of acres in extreme southeastern part of the Delta that was impacted. Several of those farms down that area were luckily protected by interior levees, so they were spared. It did disrupt some processing and some production as well, but I think we were very, very lucky. If any of those interior levees had given away, the worst case scenario would have been that we'd have had water all the way up to Highway 12, in Belzona.
Many people incorrectly assume that farmers are insured for all losses or will get disaster payments to bail them out. Doug Jeter filed for disaster payments in 2008 and 2009, and he just recently received the 08 payment.
I got it in October of last year, 2.5 years later. I got it for 08, and I still hadn't got it for 09. So just because they declared a disaster area don't think you're gonna have relief, because it's not that much anyway compared to what you're losing.
The joke on disaster payments are usually if you survive the disaster and get to the payments, you've made it anyway. It takes so long, and they're usually not very good payments. A couple years ago they gave $17 an acre on soybeans, and it takes a lot more than $17 an acre to grow soybeans.
Officials say that flooding in Mississippi has caused between $250 and $500 million in damages to agriculture. From the loss of an almost ready wheat crop, to the loss of crops already planted, to the loss of seed that was already in the grain bins, the full effects of the flood of 2011 may not be known for a long, long time.